This is your host, Brendan, and you're listening to the Ordinary to Ultra podcast. Each episode, I bring in an ultra runner and ask them about their journey to their first ultramarathon, or their first time running a new ultra distance. We'll dive into why they started running in the first place, why they decided to run an ultra, the obstacles they encountered, and what it took to get to the finish line and beyond.
But yeah, it was not the wrong, it was the wrong direction. And that led to, I think, maybe a 5 mile extra. And like, it took me a little bit of time to realize that I was probably not going in the right direction.
Yeah.
By which time, like when I was like, okay, I haven't seen anyone, which is weird. Okay, I'm probably not on the right track. And like, oh, it's probably the guy probably pointed me in the wrong direction. Then I was so far that based on how the course is, I felt that the best thing to do was to go all the way to the next aid station anyway, which is what I did. But that meant I went like 4 miles extra, 5 mile extra. Then I told them I was like, well, well, it sucks, dude. And like we kind of arranged it so that basically I ended up just going in the right direction from then on. And instead of just redoing the whole thing.
Hey everyone, Brendan here. You have been listening to Simon Guerard. Simon was in his first 50-miler, his first ultramarathon, and someone told him where to go, and it was the wrong direction. So you were just hearing him talk about how he was pointed the wrong way, and it added 8 miles to his ultramarathon. Terrible. But in today's episode, we're going to talk about how he pushed through that and how he dealt with it, and if he was able to get to the finish line. Simon is amazing. He has, in his 4-year career that started in 2020, he has run 33 plus 100-mile ultra marathons. He loves the 100-mile distance, and he'll talk about why a little bit in this episode. But he's a super awesome dude, and he's accomplished a lot. Simon is 37 years old. He's from Montreal, Quebec. He lives today in Carlsbad, California with his wife. He does business development for a pharmaceutical company for his job. And I asked him what his hobbies were, and he said running. Running is his main hobby, and he does run a YouTube and Instagram channel along with his running. So you'll have to check out the description for his links to his social media accounts. All right, no more from me. Let's get into Simon's story. Hey, Simon, welcome to the podcast, and thanks for being here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Awesome. I'm curious, have you gone on any fun adventures lately? Any fun runs or other types of adventures in the outdoors?
Yeah, I mean, I had the unusual one. I had a business trip in Japan where I have been super jet lagged and tired, but I was able to squeeze in a little run in there. So I ran in Tokyo, which was quite exciting.
Big city. Is that a weird experience? A cool experience?
It's very similar to running elsewhere, except that you run on the other side of the sidewalk.
Oh, that's true. And you live in California. Do you live in a pretty busy part of town? Where are you at right now?
I live in Carlsbad, which is and in a suburb of Carlsbad, which is north of San Diego. So it's a very quiet and peaceful place. Suburban life, very much, and maybe an hour away from some pretty cool mountain.
Okay, nice. All right. So Tokyo would be so different, though. Oh my goodness. Personally, I've traveled to New York before, and that's the biggest city I've seen. It's huge. Never ran there though, and I imagine that would be a different experience. Was it pretty easy to breathe in with like all the, I don't know if there's lots of cars driving by. Is it like
Tokyo is very, very, Yeah, Tokyo is very, very clean and drivers are
It's
very, very
clean.
good. I think I would be scared to run in certain place in New York to be hit by a taxi or something, but Tokyo was fine. It was a good experience. It was fun.
Wow. And you weren't able to run Mount Fuji while you were there, were you?
No, but I'm actually seriously considering doing Mount Fuji 100 this April. We'll
My
see if I can get
goodness.
in. If not, I'm gonna do it someday for sure. Would be fun.
That would be amazing. They do a lottery?
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
Well, I hope you get in. I would want to watch a video on that for sure.
Yeah.
Um, if I haven't mentioned already in the intro, so yeah, Simon's got a YouTube video, or sorry, a YouTube channel, and he does amazing videos on the different ultras he is running. So we'll mention his channel later on, um, so y'all can follow him and look at what he's doing. Awesome stuff. Um, okay, I want to head back in time to when you first got into running. I'm curious around what time it was and why did you start running in the first place?
Yeah, I think my journey into running has been a slow journey. I've always run a little bit at the gym, but just, the 15-minute cardio that you do before actually working out, that was the extent of my running, I would say before. But I've always
Mm,
been a hiker. So I've always spent a lot of time in the mountains and on trails. So I think my trail and ultra running actually comes more from that. And
uh-huh.
I didn't even know that ultra running was a thing, but back back when I did grad school, I was in Europe, and at some point I was in the Alps, and we just so happened to be on the course of a race that is called Tour des Géants in Italy, which is a 200 miler. It's kind of the original 200 miler, a crazy, crazy race, and I had no
Uh-huh.
clue what they were doing. And when I heard about that, I felt, wow, this is really cool. They get to see so much in such a short amount of time. So that really kind of hooked me to the notion of ultra running and trail running.
Mm,
And
mm-hmm.
and then I just slowly incorporated running into my trail adventure in general. So instead of walking 20 miles and all of a sudden you do 30 miles and you include a little bit of running. So kind of gradually going into that before getting more serious into the sport.
Mm-hmm. And this was it 2017 that this
Oh.
transition started happening, or when was it?
I mean, yeah, the story of Tour des Géants is probably more 2016 or
Okay.
2015. So it's pretty old, but
Okay.
I didn't start right away. It was just,
Uh,
I was already hiking, and then it's just, there was more and more shuffling and jogging when I was hiking, but I didn't really get seriously into running until later. At that time, I hadn't run even a half marathon, I think, or maybe I
okay.
had actually. That's a good question.
Yeah.
I should know my story better. But around that time, I ran a half marathon, but I was not really that serious into running at the time. But what really switched it to being a main focus of sports and just a way to rediscover myself was around the COVID time. I was working a
Uh-huh.
pretty gnarly job, crazy hours, and at some point I just realized that my life right now is just waking up, working, 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 maybe eating at some point and using the restroom and then sleeping, and that was it. And it felt that was not very fulfilling.
Uh-huh.
So I was looking for kind of an escape to that, and trail and ultra running just sound like the perfect excuse to totally disconnect from work. You're in the mountain, you have no self-service, you're just by yourself, and that was appealing to me very much. So I signed
Awesome.
up for, yeah, so I signed up for my first ultra marathon. It was Coldwater 52 mile in I want to say it was January 2020 or 2019. 2020,
Okay. Uh-huh.
around COVID. So it was right before kind of COVID hit.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was, yeah, we didn't know it
Yeah.
back then, but it was already in
Right.
the air. Yeah.
Yeah, because was it February, March that it kind of hit and it went viral viral, ha. But like everyone kind of learned about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of funny because I can track exactly Like I remember exactly when these things happened because of which race was and was not canceled.
Oh yeah.
So already when I started working back in January, I'm in life science, healthcare, biotechnology. We were
Uh-huh.
already talking about it. Uh,
Uh-huh.
Never would have imagined that it would lead to kind of a global pandemic, but it was already in the air. We knew there was something going on in China. Um, at the high level, that there was a new infection. We didn't think it was that big at the time. So I ran cold water. That
Hmm.
was not an issue. I ran Black Canyon in February. That was not an issue. I ran, I think it was Everglade 50 in Florida early March, and or mid-March, we were the last weekend before there was a travel ban and every plane were grounded.
Uh-huh.
So we just kind of got under the bar at that point, and the airport were absolutely nuts. That was quite traumatic actually.
Oh man.
Yeah, we were pretty lucky.
Yeah. Well, I personally was signed up for I was in college at the time, signed up for a what do you call it? Travel abroad sort of thing. In Singapore, we were supposed to leave in March, I think, and we were like talking about it, planning, had it all planned out, super excited for it, and then yeah, COVID hit, and I was so bummed that I wasn't able to make that trip. But glad you that didn't quite happen for you. That you at least were able to make. Sounds like three whole events before COVID hit, three
Yeah,
ultras.
before everything else got canceled, exactly.
Yeah, well, that is lucky. So three ultras. All right, so we jumped right into that. Like, um, what were they again? You said the
Yes.
Blackwater 50, and what were they?
No, so the first one was Coldwater 52.
Coldwater
It's a
52.
race by Aravaipa close to Phoenix. They have a 100
Okay.
mile also, which I've been doing pretty much every year now. Then I did Black Canyon 100K, which is
Okay.
also Aravaipa, which is also close to Phoenix, and now that's part of the World Trail Major. I'm actually racing it this year. Well, whatever.
Yeah,
Yeah, 2024 depends, I guess, when this is public. But yeah, I'm racing
sure.
it this year. And then after that was Everglade 50K, which was, no, 50 miles, sorry, which was a race organized by Bob Baker, which is kind of a legend in ultra running. The race itself doesn't exist anymore, though, but he still has a lot of race in Florida. It's a very interesting guy.
Okay. So I'm curious, when you did you sign up for all three of these at the same time? And to me, as a new ultra runner, or someone who really has just signed up for their first and hasn't even run it yet, I'm thinking, how did you know you could run a 50 miler and also 100K with like the next month? Uh,
Yeah, I didn't know it at the
that's
time. I didn't sign, yeah, you're right. I didn't sign up for everything all at once. I signed up for
okay.
I can't remember which one I think the first one was Everglade actually. So it was the 50 mile in Florida. That was the first one, but I could see that my training was going very well and I knew I was ready before that. So I looked for a race that would be easy to travel to. And one of the aspect of that is that for work, I was traveling back then and, that enabled us to basically travel to places like Phoenix, which is not necessarily the most exciting place to go to unless you're racing. So
Yeah.
that felt like the perfect. I'll actually go do something fun in Phoenix, and I saw
Hmm.
Coldwater the race, and I felt, yeah, I mean, I'm gonna be ready by then. Signed up for it, went for it, and after the race, I was feeling pretty good, and I was curious if I could do the 100K.
Hmm.
But I didn't know it at the time, and I couldn't have imagined that I would have been able to do that at the time.
Okay, that makes more sense. Like you are a very confident human, Simon. If you just signed up for all three of those right away, that would be awesome. But yeah, that makes a little more sense. Maybe I don't think I could have done that
Yeah,
that confident. Yeah.
I think every or most ultra runner have self-doubt, which I think is very reasonable, and that definitely includes me. Uh, it's just when I was closer to that, then I knew I could do more. Similarly,
Hmm.
I think the first race I actually like the first 100 mile I signed up for was Run Rabbit Run, which is
Hmm.
in September. But then I was seeing that my progress was pretty fast, and then I signed up for a race much before that, actually, which turned out to be a great decision.
A 100 miler, an
Yeah.
earlier 100 miler. Okay.
Well, it was Zion, but Zion was canceled also
Zion.
that year, so
Oh,
I actually ended up
yeah.
running my own 100 mile, but it was a
Oh,
good thing.
dang. That's a local one for me. I'm from Utah, and I mean, I haven't run that, but man, Zion is beautiful. So I think you've run it since then, correct?
Yes, Zion is one of the
Good.
best races out there. They have different
Oh,
distance.
nice.
They have from a half marathon to all the way to 100 mile, and I think they have 100K and 50K at the same weekend in the same place. It's not
Oh,
a
nice.
Zion itself; it's just outside of Zion, so it's more around the Mesa in that area, not like the kind of the
The
Zion
canyon.
Canyon. Yeah, it's not in there. I
Interesting.
think, yeah, I think it's difficult to organize race in national park, and difficult, I mean impossible, or
Yeah,
almost impossible.
makes sense. So your first 50 miler though was you're thinking the Everglades,
No, the first one was cold water in January.
cold water. Okay. So I'm curious, what was the longest distance you'd run before cold water?
It was a marathon. It
You'd
was a
run a
trail
marathon.
marathon, so at least I had that
Okay.
going for me. But
Okay.
the I had done the Moab marathon. I think it's in October, maybe just before that.
Hmm.
And then it was just it was just a matter of doubling the distance, which is pretty hard. But
It's a lot.
yeah, it's a lot, and there's definitely it's not just about running at some point, especially at the 50-mile distance. But yeah, so I remember crossing the 26.2 mile on my watch and thinking, yes, that's the furthest I've ever been. And then I had
Yeah.
the Lord of the Rings, Sam saying like, if I take one more step, this is the furthest away from home I'll ever have been. And then I was like, yep, I've just done it. And then thinking about that every other step, this is still the furthest I've ever been. So that was pretty cool.
That is cool. What a reference.
Yeah.
Love Lord of the Rings. So, how did you feel after this first trail marathon? Were you able to complete that pretty easily? Was it pretty easy for you? Was it pretty difficult? Like, how were you?
Cold water.
Well,
Yeah,
no, this
the
trail
Moab.
marathon you did before. Yeah. Was it
Okay, yeah,
Moab?
yeah,
Yeah.
Moab Marathon. I felt pretty good. I think back then I was still in the mindset of marathon running almost, where pace matter and you're supposed to run most of it. So I was putting more pressure on myself in terms of what was the time I would finish and not how I felt at the finish.
Okay.
Um, yeah, I completed it fairly easily. Obviously, there was some walking the hills, but everything
Uh-huh.
else was pretty decent running pace. I must have done something like it's a long time ago. I think 5 hours maybe, which is not a
Yeah.
great time, but not a terrible time either, like an in between.
Yeah.
Um,
For a
so
trail
yeah,
marathon too.
yeah, and I think there was at least like I want to say 4,000 feet of gain, maybe 4 or 5,000.
Oh yeah.
So
That's
like a
definitely a good amount.
yeah, like definitely some climbs, some climbs, which definitely slows you down. But that went pretty well. I think the biggest adjustment from running a normal marathon to doing that is definitely just being used to trail. And because my background is much more hiking and then jogging
Yeah.
on trails, then that kind of was a seamless transition. Yeah, the effort is bigger than a normal marathon, like physically harder, it takes longer, but I think I already had the experience of running on trail, which is the difficult adaptation normally, and that for me was not an issue. I was lucky
Yeah.
there.
Yeah, that makes sense. Um, I'm curious, what what did you do between that trail marathon, Moab, and Coldwater that you think made the biggest difference for you to be able to complete your 50 miler? Like what did it take to get from that marathon to the 50 miler?
Yeah, I definitely was very consistent in my training, increasing mileage gradually and I don't remember specifically what mileage I was doing back then, but my guess is probably towards the end of the preparation for the 50 mile. I think I was probably doing about 50 mile a week. And
Okay.
just being consistent with that was pretty important. I think the other thing that was very important was, and I had learned that before, but I think it's a must, is to find that pace, which is very, very comfortable. You're kind of forever pace. And that means in training, yeah, I had some long runs that were a marathon and not being too tired afterwards. Of course, you are somewhat tired, but you went at such a slow pace that you're not pooped out. You're feeling fairly fresh and you can still have a long run the next day. But that requires a little bit of experimentation, just knowing how much you can push and how much you should push and how much you should kind of not push.
And did you find that just by feel, like that forever pace? Did you just go out tons of times and just tested it out yourself to find what that pace was? Or did you use some tools, like your Garmin watch maybe, or
That was definitely by feeling.
Feeling.
The most I used my watch for these was to really force myself to keep my pace down. And I tried different pace, and like a 10-minute mile was somewhat a comfortable pace that I felt I could hold forever. So then I would just make sure that if I look at my watch, I'm not just going at 9-minute miles because I'm feeling good. Because your legs kind of carry you. Like if you're going so slow, it feels almost like walking sometimes, and it's easy to just push it a little bit more because you feel good. So I was really trying to don't push to the level that you can, just push to 10-minute mile, nothing more. And the goal was very, very deliberate. I remember my first marathon in training where I just did it as a training run, and the number one goal was not even to do the marathon. The number one goal was to not be tired afterwards, even if that meant going pretty slow. And I think that was super helpful later on for any ultra marathon, because that's the pace that you should go at. You should never go in the red, or almost never go in the red.
Yeah. I'm new-ish to running. I've been running for about a year and have this goal to run my first ultra in 2024. But up till just a few weeks ago, my training largely consisted of higher heart rate kind of push runs, and I would just try to see how long I could go at a push, like zone 4 sort of pace, and learned that is not the way for endurance training anyways. If you're really training for ultras, you want to be training in your zone 2s, maybe your lower heart rates, the forever pace, like you said, because it's just so long that you need to know that you can keep going.
Yeah, and I don't know if you know about the 80-20 rule. That's definitely something that I preach a lot on my channel when I give advice on how to build up your training schedule. The slow mileage are definitely, that for me felt like the biggest learning was that I was always running too fast in training, and then reducing that pace to most of your run. But I think there's a huge benefit to doing these. Like for me was like a 10-minute mile for most of my mileage in training, but there's still a 20% of my running that was dedicated to actually pushing the pace. And then I was able, because I was better rested, I was able to push that pace much faster than if I'm always running around whatever, like an 8-minute mile. Now I'm able to do these at a closer to 6:30, 7-minute mile for shorter period, shorter distance, but you're training something different than what you're training during your bulk of the mileage, which is slow mileage, to build a good base.
Exactly. That's great advice. I want to talk about race day for your first race, but before we get into that, I'm curious about I want to talk about gear briefly and see if this is helpful for this audience. But I'm curious if you were to say there's like 1 to 3 pieces of gear that really helped you run your first 50 miler, what would those pieces of gear be? And you can say the brand or not. Maybe it's just having good running shoes. But anyway, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean that definitely the first one is you have to have the proper shoes. And the good running shoes, there's a lot of factor that goes behind that. You're often asked, like when you have a channel like mine, like what's the best shoe? And the
Yeah,
answer is like,
that's
look, if there was really a best shoe, they would only make that one. So first it
yeah.
needs to fit your feet well, but also like what's the trail you're gonna run? It for mine, it was a rocky race, a lot of
Mm,
small rocks. So it's good to have more protection, like a stronger sole. You don't really need aggressive treads because it's not muddy. But if it was a muddy course, then I would go for something totally different. So appropriate shoe
mm,
for whatever you're going to race and appropriate for your feet and something that you've worked with a lot so that you know you won't have bad surprise on race day. Um, I think a running vest is pretty important. Aid station for longer distance race tend to be a little further apart, and at some point also you're much slower. So doing these like 6 mile are taking closer to 1 hour and a half, maybe 2 hours sometimes for some people towards the end of the race. So having the capacity to carry a lot of water, carry food for that amount of time is pretty clutch. That one, I think there are like brands that I prefer. I definitely like the Salomon Advanced Skin 12, especially for
mm,
mountain racing. And yeah, I mean, I think these are the really big one. Then everything else is
mm.
smaller things that if you get the wrong one, you'll regret. Like if you don't have the right underwear and you start chafing and you're bleeding out of your ass,
Oh,
it's never fun. It's not that
uh-oh.
they're special underwear, but you have to have the right one. You have to have some lube. If it's a mountain race, you probably have to have poles. So yeah,
True.
kind of depends on the situation.
No, that's great advice. Yeah, I personally got I think it's the smaller version of your vest, the Solomon Advskin 6 or 8, maybe. And I love the vest. And I think what's nice about it is on race day, it's got little, what do they call them? Hydropack flasks in the front. So you can unscrew the lids there, and then the aid stations can like fill up your waters really quick instead of having like uh, what do you call it?
A bladder.
Yes, a
Yeah,
bladder. Thanks. Yeah.
the danger with the big bladder is that you only have one bag to carry liquids, and it's gonna fail someday. And if you're unlucky, that's gonna fail at the very wrong time.
Hmm.
It's happened to me a couple of times, and then you think you were sweating a lot and your back was a little bit wet, but eventually you realize that you don't have any more water, and that's not great, especially in the middle of the race where you don't have any other container to carry any liquids. The two soft flask is also very practical. It's easy to fill, like you say, but it's also nice sometimes to have carry both pure water and then maybe tailwind or something with electrolyte, and
Hmm.
favor the electrolyte drinks or something with calories. But once you start
Yes.
having, GI issue, then you can switch
Mm.
to water, which is at least you're drinking. It's not ideal, but it's better than nothing. So having both of them for me is always kind of important.
Yeah. Um, that's a good point with the GI problems. I'm curious if you have, I think you mentioned to me offline that you have a pretty strong stomach, but what happens if you start feeling the runs, or you feel like you need to puke, and maybe you do puke, or you have to take a diarrhea, like and your
Yeah, I mean,
stomach is just really unsettled. Do you just drink, and you drink electrolyte
yeah, I mean, so
stuff,
what's gonna
or
happen with GI issue is that, yeah, it's one direction or the other, things are coming out. So
yeah.
I have a pretty strong stomach, but at some point you have issues. So if it comes down, then the best thing to do is just taking Imodium, and then that's gonna
uh,
basically stop it.
okay.
So I don't take it as a prevention. I think that's gonna impair a little bit digestion, but I know some people that just do it as a prevention. But
Hmm.
what you eat also matters. So if you experience that a lot, you could look into eating things that are a little bit less salty slash sugary and drink a little bit more water. You can kind of basically adapt. Like if I've heard the notion of a sugar bomb, I don't know if that's necessarily true, but bacteria will love all the sugar in your gut, and there's only so much sugar you can absorb per hour. So if you eat too much sugar, it's just sitting in your gut, and then the bacteria are having a big party, and that's when you basically need to evacuate everything. So there's things you can try to do to not have the issue in the future, but when it's happening, then you can just take Imodium. If it's coming up, I think that's much harder because then you're not even absorbing much. I'm lucky that it's pretty rare for me. I think what you need to do with that is you have to, well, you probably have to puke anyway, but you have to be vigilant of not feeling too good after puking and just going and not eating. I think that's the reaction, is you feel good and you kind of forget about it, but you forget that you just lost quite a lot of water and quite a lot of nutrients, and that if you just keep going because you're feeling better, in 10 miles you're gonna be in big trouble. So you need to slow down and try to keep drinking or eating and then trying different stuff that would sit better with your stomach. And at least at the very minimum, it will be water. If you're dehydrated, you're not gonna last very long. But without food also, it's gonna be an issue eventually that you need to resolve.
Yeah, especially with these long distances. Just got to keep the energy up. Well, that's great advice. So, Simon, I want to hear about specifically this first 50 miler now that you ran. Cold water. I'm so bad with names, right? It's cold water in Arizona.
Yep, that's right.
So I would love to hear, and I think everyone would like to hear, just from waking up till the end of the day, how did this race go for you? Like, how did the day go for you? I'd love to hear about it.
Sure. So it was in Arizona. I was there just for the weekend, right? Because I was flying from work, so I didn't bother booking a hotel or anything like that. I just rented a car at the airport. So I was I was sleeping, camping over there at the trailhead. Well, not a trailhead, but the park where they start the race. So first thing is that I got woken pretty early as kind of activities around the start line were happening. I wish I had slept a little bit more, but as soon as I was awake, I was full on awake, kind of nervous about what was coming. Can I do that? I've never ran that far. I, in fact, just ran half of that distance before. So I was pretty nervous about it, but I think with things like that, same thing when I was biking, race biking, mountain biking, or things like that, you kind of get in the zone and kind of over focus on little details about, okay, like, am I forgetting anything in my pack? Okay, how does it feel right now? You tighten like your vest. Oh, it's a little too tight, and just adjusting everything to kind of keep your mind busy.
Yeah.
And next thing you know, I'm at the starting area. It's pretty darn cold, but you don't want to dress up because you're gonna run very soon. And you start talking with people, and already I could feel how nice the people were around the start line. I met a bunch of people, which unfortunately I already forgot who they were, but I met a lot of people just chatting, some new runner, some experienced runner, and just talking about what's coming up ahead. And like, you can feel the excitement in the air. So that was pretty cool. The race started, I think, something like 6 a.m, or like it was just before sunrise. So you needed a lamp, but you knew it was, most of these races start around 5 or earlier, but
yeah, that makes sense. When you say you got up early or got woken up early, was that like 4 a.m, or?
It must have been, it must have been something like 4, like when people start arriving with their car and they're super loud. Of course, they don't know you're sleeping there, so it's not, it's not their fault, but
yeah,
there's always someone who comes very early, and then the volunteers and race organizer, of course, they have to be there before everyone. So it got loud. Not blaming them, but I was wide awake by the time the race was starting. I had, I'd done everything, like eating a little bit. They had some food. I used the restroom, so I was good to go, excited and ready to really warm up. Like I remember also it was kind of pretty cold morning. It's January in the desert, so the night can get decently
Mm.
cold, so we were all kind of
Hmm.
bunched up around some fireplace.
Uh,
Yeah,
did you
then
did you do an actual warm up before the race started?
no,
Okay.
I think running slow for a little bit is all the warm up you need for
Yeah.
something like that. Um,
Okay.
I maybe if a professional runner, maybe they would do it differently, but yeah, I just start at a reasonable pace.
Yeah.
Uh, and then it started. I think there was different start for different distance, but I'm not sure anymore. I think the 100 mile start like 15 minute or 30 minute before us. So I watched that. Then it was our turn. Then we just we just went, which was pretty cool.
Hmm.
Um, I was really excited. I barely remember the first aid station, like the first 4 miles. I know the course now, so I know that there was some decent technical trail and some up and downhill, but next thing I knew, I was kind of already there. The sun was like had risen already, and it was pretty cool. Then I managed in the next section. It's not a super technical course, but I managed to fall hard.
Oh shoot.
Yeah, around I think mile 6 or something like that. I still have a mark on my knee from that, and
Whoa.
yeah, and I think it's psychological, but one of my finger feels crooked ever since. So it was,
Whoa.
yeah, it was a
Shoot.
stupid fall. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Was it on a
That
hill? Like, what was the situation?
no, it was just a very non-technical segment, but
Oh,
on a little rug that was sticking out, but like kind of
uh-huh.
stuck in the trail. So it
Yep.
was just me not lifting my feet enough.
Yep. Yep.
It's pretty easy to eat dust when you're trail running, and especially when you're not paying enough attention. I think when the trail is super technical, it's you won't fall because you're 100% focused on that. But at that time, I was not focusing enough on the trail,
Yeah.
and I was just kind of running. I don't remember even talking, but I was just kind of in my head and not noticing
Yeah.
like little details. So lack of vigilance. I felt pretty
Yeah.
stupid, but I bounced back immediately.
Yeah, you
It's
probably
painful.
feel, yeah, you feel a little dumb. So you like scramble, get up real quick and get going.
Yeah, and I was wondering. I was like, hey, am I injured? And like we'll see in a mile or two. Like that the adrenaline will keep you safe from severe
Yeah.
pain for a little bit.
Yeah.
But then it kind of got better and better. In fact, I think
Oh,
the
good.
finger was like really what hurt the most for the longest time. So I really think that there was a minor injury there. But the good thing is that you're not
Huh.
really using your finger so much when you're running. So
Yes.
I was good with
You st
that.
Yeah, that's a good thing it wasn't a toe.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And the
And
the
you're,
knee, the knee was bad, but it
yeah.
didn't feel so painful. I think that it was a good fall, all things
Yeah.
considered.
Were you bleeding at all? Did it break
Yeah,
skin? Yeah.
yeah, yeah, it
Oh,
was bleeding, but
mm,
nothing too bad. Like just enough
okay.
that I should have washed it. Like at the end of the day, like my leg was a little bit gross, and then the coagulated blood and the dust and the
Yeah.
dirt, like after I think it took me 11 hour that race, like it was really hard to clean it appropriately afterwards.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, so that was kind of a rough kind of wake up call, but I guess that kind of set me straight afterwards. I was running pretty well, feeling pretty good. It got pretty warm very quickly after that. And then the way this course is two loops of 20 miles, which you did. It's
Mm.
the same loop that you do in both directions. So you kind of turn around and do in the opposite direction.
Oh,
And
okay.
then a third loop, which is a little smaller, but use part of the trail that you've already done. And
Okay.
they tell us at the start, like, just really be careful where you turn, like first loop you do that, and then second loop you do that, third loop you do that. So it can be a little confusing. So
Yeah.
after the 20 mile, get back to headquarters, you do your little things. Things were going pretty well, like the fall was far behind me and I was feeling in the zone, like kind of
Good.
racing well. And then at one aid station, and I'll never forget that. I usually don't say that it's this race, but I asked a volunteer at the aid station, all right, like I've done one lap, like this is my second lap. Like where am I supposed to go? Am I turning left or right? And then he said like, oh, you go left. I was like, are you sure? Because this is my second lap, this is not my first lap. And he was like, yes, I'm sure, you turn left. So then I did that, but he was
Okay.
absolutely incorrect.
Seriously? Oh
Yeah,
no.
he was incorrect. So what happened with that, just because of the way it is,
Uh,
normally you notice when you're on the trail because there's marker all the time, like a little orange flag, say every
yeah.
200 yards. So you know you're on trail, and if you don't see anything, you know that you probably took a wrong turn and you're just off course. But the
Uh-huh.
issue with that one was that I was still on the course. There were still
Yeah.
markers everywhere.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
you don't see so many people in a small race like that. So I kept going, and it was just weird. And back then I didn't know how to use my watch, like to look where I was, like on the
Yeah.
GPX.
Uh-huh.
I don't think that would have necessarily helped, because what I would have seen is that I was still on course regardless.
Right. Right.
Because I had been there and like you were supposed to go back. But yeah, it was not the wrong, it was the wrong direction. And that led to, I think, maybe a 4 mile, 5 mile extra.
Ooh,
And like it took me a little bit
nice.
of time to realize that I was probably not going in the right direction.
Yeah.
Um, by which time, like when I was like, okay, I haven't seen anyone, which is weird. Okay, I'm
Oh
probably not on
man.
the right track. And like, oh, it's probably the guy probably pointed me in the wrong direction. Then I was so far that based on how the course is, I felt that the best thing to do was to go all the way to the next aid station anyway, which is what I did. But that meant I went like 4 miles extra, 5 mile extra. Then I told them,
Oh
and I was like,
man.
well, yeah, well, it sucks, dude. And like we kind of arranged it so that basically I ended up just going in the right direction from then on. And instead of just redoing the whole thing, but I sent them my GPX later, and like basically I did a 60-mile race instead of 52, which is not
Oh,
great. Yeah,
so you
that was
knew you could do 100K. You knew.
yeah, that's part of why I signed up for my 100K afterwards, that I knew
Yeah.
I could do it because I had basically done it
That's so
by mistake.
funny.
But yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, not funny in the moment. That's
Yeah, no, it
frustrating.
was not. It's yes. I think there's depending how well versed people are in like the ultra running lore, but Jim Walsley, which is probably one of the best ultra runner in like the current era. The
Hmm.
first time he did Western States, so one of the most competitive race, he was scheduled to win basically, and he was on track to beat the course record, which is kind of a lifetime achievement for sure. But
Hmm.
he did do a wrong turn, and then he
Ah,
ended up like on the road, and he's captured doing that when he realized he's not on course. And you can see like immediately he went from like running at probably like a 6, 7 minute mile to I'm not able to walk anymore. Your energy
jeez.
just like vanished. It feels like you're a balloon that gets deflated immediately. You were just pushing so hard, and now you know that the faster you were going just now, the further you'll have to trace back your steps, and it's just really painful, and you're really feeling like, "Ah, fuck this. I'm not doing this. Today is not my day." So I very much felt like that.
Right.
And definitely there was a moment where I was just walking and feeling like this is bullshit, and being really frustrated at the person that told me the wrong direction because I took time to check. But ultimately, it's trail running. It's my fault for not confirming it. The runner is responsible for going the right direction. Yeah, the volunteer shouldn't say the wrong direction, but it's still my responsibility. You have to take accountability. And most importantly,
Yeah.
it's like I'm here right now. I can't change taking the wrong turn, but what I can change is how am I going to react to that? So after a little bit of like bitching, then I was back on track. Then I was like, all right, like this sucks, but I'm gonna run.
Hmm.
And the kind of the energy that carried me for at least 10 miles was like a borderline. Life is not fair. I'm pissed off. I'm angry, and like I'm angry at myself, but angry at the situation, which is not energy I usually tap into. But that worked pretty well. For like the next 2, 3 hours, I was just passing people nonstop, which was interesting.
Nice.
Because
Take
these
what you
people,
can get.
yeah, exactly. But these people, once I was back in the right direction, I mean, they were physically ahead of me on the course, But in terms of distance, they were easily 5 miles,
Mm,
4 miles behind me. So I was
true.
definitely already going much faster than they were. And every time, like, I was like, oh, like, I gotta pass this person. Like, it's not fair that we're at the same place right now, but I'm a faster runner. So I would pass them. Not that I care so much about finishing before them, just, I don't know, that energy kind of carried me there.
Yeah,
I kind of
that
rode
was
the
your
wave. I
vibe.
was like, yeah, exactly. I was like, fine, like, I'll just do it. The rest of the race was pretty uneventful. When I started the race, I was wondering if I could finish before sunset.
Mm,
But as soon as I took the wrong turn, I knew that this was not a thing. So when I was at headquarters, I grabbed a headlamp, knowing that the night would eventually come. And
yeah,
it was also going to be my first racing experience at night. So I was a little bit worried about that,
yeah,
especially that, I was still
yeah.
feeling the pain from falling down early in the race and wondering if I was going to hurt myself again and not really wanting that. But that turned
Hmm.
out to not be an issue. When the sun came down, it's the desert, so the temperature just fell down immediately. But
Hmm.
that felt good. Like, we're done with the heat. That's great. Sure, it's dark, but I have my headlamp and I was pretty comfortable jogging. Like, I was not running anymore. I was jogging at best, but I felt pretty comfortable about it. So the rest of the race was actually uneventful. And yeah,
Okay.
I was pretty happy with the outcome, but mostly in retrospect, I was happy that I was able to adapt to bad things happening. Nothing serious, but hey, I did eat dust pretty early on. I did take a wrong turn that added significant mileage, but somehow I just turned things around and just finished anyway, and I was pretty happy about that.
Yeah, you kept going.
Yeah.
Great example. Like that would have been a great excuse to be just pissed and turn in the towel.
I was
So,
definitely pissed, which is not my vibe normally. If anyone watched my channel ever, I'm not someone who's either
yeah,
pissed or competitive ever. That was like such an exception, but
yes,
it is a
yes.
thing.
Yeah, if you got a negative vibe, yeah, I can second that. Simon's channel is very positive. That was quite just that was a hard experience, especially on your first one, you're like, of course, like the first one I run, I gotta take a wrong turn. Like it's
Yeah,
unfortunate,
I
but
felt really stupid because there's a lot of work that goes behind getting ready for these races, and then you make such a
yeah.
stupid decision. Even the fall
Uh,
itself, I was pissed at myself. Like, come on, Simon, like you've run on trail before. Like, why is this trail any different? That was not a technical segment. You should know better than that. You should be more careful. Like, why were you so careless in that moment? And yeah, I felt stupid and guilty about it, but then that helped
mm,
me refocus afterwards. And I think in the end, that's what matters, is how you adapt to the situation.
yeah, tell me about it. Now after this 50 miler, I know you've done many a more races since then. Do you have a count? Do you have a count of how many 50 milers, 100 Ks, and 100 milers you've done in total?
I've done 3,300 mile or more. And then distance
It's
below that,
amazing.
I would need to take the time to think about it, but about
Yeah.
like three or four 50 miler, 3 or 400K,
Okay.
and one or two 50K.
Yeah, these 100 milers obviously seems like you like those a lot. Tell me why you've stuck with the 100-mile distance more than these shorter distances. What's the difference for you?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of difference. I think there's a lot of different vibes. More recently, a lot of people are into 200 miler. I think the 100 mile is a good distance for weekend adventure, basically. Like, that's what you're doing over the weekend. So that's perfect for me given my work schedule. Um,
Mm,
but there's also a different pace to it. When I do a 50K, I I'm going to run that. And same thing with the 50 mile. I'm running this. And whereas the 100 mile is much more focused on getting there, and you just have to make at least for me, I just think about, I need to do the cutoff, and there's really nothing else that matters. So that's a vibe that I prefer. It's less stressful. It's much more about keep going, and that enables a lot of positive things. I think one is that it's more focused on resilience than actual physical prowess. And it's definitely more social. If you go through the night, and 100 mile, you're going to go through the night, or at least a significant portion of it. You'll run with people at night. And I think that's a great moment to kind of bond with people, to meet people and really live something significant together. Whereas when you do shorter distance, like a 50K, you'll probably meet people too, but it's not quite the same. You might, spend like 10 minutes with them and that's about it. Whereas there are some people we spend the whole night racing together, and helping each other out. And I think that's a vibe that I appreciate with trail and ultra running, this kind of camaraderie, which I feel happens a lot more at longer distances. Now, I've never done a 200 miler, so maybe that's even more so at these distances, but at some point it's a 200 mile. I need to convince my boss that, he doesn't need me for the weekend. That's harder to do than just saying I'm going to be away for the weekend. It's like, are you still going to look at your email, Simon? I was like, yeah, maybe not during the race, but the rest of the weekend. Yeah.
Jeepers. Yeah. I mean, how long does a 200 miler take? Those take like 3 days.
If you're really fast, 3 days.
If you're fast. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, if you're extremely fast, it's going to be like 50 hours. But yeah, someone like me would probably do it in 85 hours, I would say. 85, 90 hours.
For me, as someone new, haven't run my first 50K yet. It's like, wow, how do people do it? It's incredible. And your story just with your first 50 miler, but then also all these hundreds you've run, it's amazing just what the body can do. And I appreciate you talking about the adventure. I am definitely getting into it for the adventure myself. It's just fun to get outside, and it's cool with the 100 miler that you get to meet people, and maybe talk more. That's really intriguing to me. Maybe I'll just skip the 50 miler and do 100.
Yeah. Start directly from there. Some people do that. Some people do that, and some people regret that, but I certainly don't advise it.
Yeah. That was a joke. I will not.
I know. Some people listening will.
I know.
We warned you. That's a bad idea. It's possible though. It's possible, but it's, I don't recommend it.
Yeah, my opinion is you've only got one first, so I'm taking it slow. Like I could jump right to a 50 miler, but I said, well, I'll just do a 50K first. Like it'll be just more than a marathon, which is something I've been familiar with, and we'll just take it slow because I have the rest of my life to still do these. So what's the rush?
Yeah, I guess it depends how old you are, huh?
It's true. I am, for the record, 27, so I have time. I guess.
You could still be a pro.
I guess. If I could quit my job, someday, maybe. Yeah. I'm curious, Simon, what final words of advice would you give the newbies on this podcast and the folks that are listening thinking, man, these races are insane. Why would I mean, I'd like to do that, but how? What would you tell these people?
Yeah, I think ultra running is a sport where what you put in is what you'll get. So through consistent work, you can achieve basically anything.
Words of wisdom. And at the beginning of this podcast, you told us why you started running. Do you run for the same reason, the same why today? I'm curious.
Probably not the same kind of that pushed me into running, which was to disconnect from work. I've changed work. It's much more reasonable now in comparison. I think it's more the community and the sense of adventure that keeps me going.
I love it. Simon, thanks for coming on today. Thanks for your time. and wisdoms and story that you've shared today. Really inspirational. And I'd love for you to tell everyone where they can follow you to really dive into your story. You have lots of YouTube videos, and maybe you have other content out there on other platforms. Where can these folks follow you?
Yeah, the best way to follow me is to go on my YouTube channel. It's Running with Simon, so that's easy enough, where I post about my 100-miler that I race every month, and also I post pretty regularly tip video for new trail runner, how to get into the sport, and very specific advice, for example, how to prevent blisters or make a training plan.
Perfect. Well, we'll have to check you out. I already have, and I hope you all do too. Great advice. I watched Simon's video on the differences between the different distances, which we sort of covered today, but that video was particularly interesting as someone who's new to ultra running. So anyhow, go check him out. Thanks again, Simon. Appreciate your time. Have a good night, and thanks everyone for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks.
Hey, Brendan here. I just wanted to thank you for listening to today's episode. As someone new to ultra running myself, I found these conversations to be super valuable, and I hope they are for you as well. And if you want to know when the next podcast episode comes out, make sure you subscribe to the show. Also, some exciting news. The Ordinary to Ultra Facebook group is live. This is a great place to meet other aspiring, new, and experienced ultra runners and have any questions you have answered, get some advice, maybe find a running buddy that's local or maybe virtual. And it's just a great place to make connections with other psychos that like to run way too much. The link is in the description of this episode if you want to go join that Facebook group and make some awesome connections. And that is all. Thanks again for joining me today, and we'll catch you in the next episode.